In this video, we're going to walk through the Microsoft Learn Lab about monitoring the health of your Azure virtual machine by using Azure Metrics Explorer and metric alerts. What this basically means is there's a lot of monitoring built into Azure that, if set up properly, will help us identify what's happening with our virtual machines, as well as help alert us to any concerns or possible issues that might be occurring. So let's go ahead and start into this. So we'll start off with the introduction. And in this scenario, we are basically the administrator for a website, specifically for a band who's on Azure, and they're going to be going on tour shortly. So we're expecting a large spike in traffic. We're not quite sure how much that spike is going to be, so what we want to do is we want to monitor it and make adjustments if necessary along the way. Now, this website includes several mission-critical services such as booking, venue information, tour dates, all stuff that, if lost, costs us money. Therefore, we want to make sure that the website is up and running regardless of how much traffic is getting to it, but we also want to be somewhat cautious with how we're building out this website so we're not overspending. So let's go ahead and jump on into this. We're going to talk a little bit about monitoring the health of our VMs. Now, there's some basic monitors that we can do for pretty much all virtual machines and pretty much all computers in general. Some of these, such as CPU utilization, network traffic, disk utilization, as well as boot success. For the first three of these, there are general rules of thumb that you can start putting in that says basically you want to keep everything within 80%. If you start going over 80% CPU usage or network usage or disk usage, you start running into some bottlenecks as you start reaching that last 20%. So you want to keep all of these somewhere below 80% in general. And we can only do that by monitoring. Additionally, the boot success, well, if the computer is not powered up and running properly, then obviously the website's not working at all. So we can definitely view some of these metrics. They are built right into the Azure portal. And we can see some examples right there, where we can see this is average CPU is spiking up way high. So by seeing these, what we can do is we can actually start identifying some trends, whether it's an immediate spike, like what we're seeing in that graph right there, where it just goes from 0 up to, looks like 500%, or if it's an ongoing trend. Depending on what type of activity is happening, it could signify either a hacker or just ongoing general interest in our environment. Beyond just those traditional metrics, there are additional metrics we can get, such as log analytics and other boot and OS specific metrics as well. So let's go ahead and jump in here, and let's start off with some boot diagnostics. So I went ahead and I created my sandbox, and we're going to start off by creating a new virtual machine running Ubuntu with a storage account assigned to it. There we go. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and copy and paste this in here, and then we'll talk about it while we are creating the virtual machines. So the first section up here on the top, first off, creates a variable called storage and assigns just a random name to it called metric storage with a random number at the end. Once we have that variable called storage, we then create a storage account in Azure. We call it whatever that random name was. Specifically, we choose for LRS type storage in the East US 2 location. Once that storage location is created, well, we then create a virtual machine in Azure. We're going to call this monitored Linux VM. That's just going to be the name of it to help us recognize as we're going through this lab that is the VM we are monitoring. It's going to be an Ubuntu LTS machine, the specific size of a B1S. Again, on the East US, it's going to create a user called Azure User, and it's configured to put boot diagnostics in that storage account that we had just created. And then lastly, it says go ahead and create some SSH keys so we can log in without requiring a password. So that is running right there. While that's running, let's go ahead and let's open up the Azure portal. We'll see how much we can go without waiting for that. So here I am, I'm in the Azure portal, and if I click on all resources, I should see my virtual machine and my storage account. So here's my storage account, metric storage with a random number at the end. And then there's that's not our virtual machine, that is the virtual machine disk. The virtual machine is still in process. So it will show up shortly. Oh wait, there it is, virtual machine. When I click on the virtual machine, so what it did is it's building out the virtual machine and powering it on. Let's see. Yes, so it did finish, it did power on, got a public IP address and everything. Great. When I click on the virtual machine, there is some basic monitoring that is included automatically. So for instance, right there under the monitoring tab, I can see I have some CPU, network, disk, and more disk options right there. We can actually get a lot more specific on the left-hand side here. If we scroll down to monitoring, right there under the monitoring section, we can then go to metrics. In this metric, let me zoom out a little bit. Here we can get a whole lot more specific with the types of metrics other than just those dashboard images that we were just saying. So for instance, what I can do is see under the scope, I specifically want my virtual machine. If I had multiple virtual machines, I could select them there. Let's see, metric namespace, I want the virtual machine host. The specific metric is the percentage of CPU. Percentage CPU, and then the aggregation, I could choose average, min, max, sum. I'm going to say max because I want to see the maximum CPU over time. Now, right now, it's not showing anything because we just turned on the virtual machine. It takes a couple of minutes for these to start showing up. But while we're waiting for that, we can add in additional metrics. Let's see, where is add? There we go, add metric. And same thing, for the metric, I want to choose inbound. Inbound flows, so this is network traffic that is coming in and the average. And so we can see that there are actually two different colors down here. There's going to be a blue, which will be my percentage of CPU, and a red, which shows network traffic coming in. So it builds all this automatically. Azure just automatically starts collecting all this and starts propagating it for me, or sorry, filling it in for me without me having to do anything. This is built in. Let's see if I refresh, will it give me any more detail? No. Let's see, we could change the time range. Don't think this is, there we go. Didn't think it would give me anything, but apparently it did. So we can actually see, oh no, CPU is still blank, but we do actually see some network traffic there within the last couple of minutes. And if I kept this going, I would start seeing CPU traffic. As we saw, there were tons of different monitors we can look into there. For right now, we'll leave it at that. Next thing I want to do is under monitoring is I want to look under my boot diagnostics. For instance, did this machine actually turn on? Or is it stuck somewhere in a blue screen on Windows or in a boot menu for Linux, or is it stuck somewhere in between actually getting the operating system up and running? In order to check for that, what I need is under monitoring, I have this boot diagnostics. Where's boot? Monitoring, oh, support and troubleshooting. There we go, boot diagnostics, right there. Boot diagnostics, what it does is it creates screenshots for my machine while it's booting. Why are they not showing? Enable. All right, so it should be showing a screenshot of the virtual machine in the boot process here. Not really sure why it's not coming up. Let's try refreshing. This is a web page after all. Still nothing. All right, so maybe it just take a couple more minutes, but basically what happens is right here is it will take a screenshot of what would actually be on the monitor for the virtual machine. This means that as the virtual machine is coming up, it takes a screenshot, puts it here. After a couple of minutes, it will take another screenshot and put it here. So if the machine ever gets a blue screen or a halt message of some sort, it will pop up at this point and alert me, or not necessarily alert me, but show me what had happened to the environment. I'm a little disappointed that it's not showing up. Save VM Metrics. See, they didn't miss anything, did I? Create the VM with boot diagnostics, which we did. Well, we'll come back to that and see if that starts showing up. All right, so back to our scenario of working for a band and running the website for it. And now we're talking about the VM metrics. And again, there's some basic metrics we might want to include here, such as our CPU. Percentage CPU is most commonly used in a lot of environments, whether you're in Azure or not. You can also do credits consumed, which for many websites where you're limited to how many CPU cycles per hour you have, this could actually be helpful. Disks, read-write, bytes, as well as operations per second. Depending on how you're configured your Azure environment, you may be concerned about the number of bytes that you're reading and writing, so the total amount of data, or the total number of IOPS, depending on your system configuration. The OS disk. Ooh, what is the disk queue depth? How long am I waiting to write things to the OS disk? Bytes per second, ops per second, or cache hits or misses. Data disks, same thing. And the network inbound or outbound flows. Network in and out billable, so how much am I actually paying for, versus network in or out total. And then the overview graphs, which is what we saw at the very beginning of the virtual machine on the overview page. These are actually wider than the ones we were seeing, but we get the point right here. Along with the overview graphs and those specific graphs that we create in an ad hoc fashion, we can also create a key performance indicator dashboard for our virtual machine. So for instance, here we can see a couple of KPIs such as CPU and the network utilization, and we can actually create a dashboard specifically for these so that we can then every single day or every couple of hours look back to this dashboard. Let's see, we can also customize those, such as the amount of time, and we can see right there, nice little time range, such as past 24 hours, past 30 minutes, past 30 days. Let's see, you want to track the CPU for the last 7 days. What is the most straightforward way? Let's see, view metrics for the VM. Set range to the last 7 days. That sounds pretty good. Let's see, view metrics for the VM on each day and store the values manually? No. View the metric for the monitor by creating a graph. This one would work. This third option can work. However, the most straightforward method is to view the metrics in the overview and just specify the last 7 days, if it allows me to do that. See, what do you have to install or create to set up simple boot diagnostics? You need an Azure storage account, but you don't need to install anything. Let's see. Yay, I got them right. All right. Then talks about diagnostics. So far we've been doing basic monitoring of the system. But there are additional diagnostics that we can do to get us actually into the operating system. So far now we're just looking at from the outside as far as CPU, network, things that are going through the rest of the environment. But we can actually get into the virtual machine and start making some doing some monitoring there. To do this, we need to use the Azure Diagnostics extension. And we can see here, if we're going through the Create Virtual Machine wizard in the Azure portal, when we get to the Management tab, there's this OS Guest Diagnostics option, which will allow us to turn on the OS Guest Diagnostics and install the agent on the virtual machine. Once that's done, that gives us a whole plethora of capabilities, such as monitoring of a web server or monitoring of individual processes, monitoring of logs, and so on. Things that are actually inside the virtual machine. Let's see. So here's some examples. For instance, if we are running Windows, well, we can get actual performance counters, not just as a virtual machine, but performance counters from Windows. So CPU, memory, disk, network, we were seeing all of those from a virtual machine standpoint, but we can also start adding in like ASP.NET counters, or SQL Server counters, or Exchange counters, or other OS or application-specific performance counters. Additionally, we can start gathering some logs, such as the application log or the security log or other logs on the system, and gather them into a central location. Any kind of crash dumps caused from blue screens can be gathered in a central location and then analyzed, as well as additional data such as application insights, Azure Monitor, or other processes. If we do this on a Linux machine, like what we have right now, again, we start off with some simple items such as the processor, memory, and the network. But then we also get things like the file system and disk utilization. As far as logs are concerned, well, we've got a great syslog receiver, so we can send all the logs from our Linux machines and all the applications on those Linux machines to a centralized syslog environment that can later be monitored in one central location. So those are the built-in metrics. There are also custom metrics that we can do. They have examples of free disk space on Windows. Not super exciting, but extremely useful, as well as the amount of swap space available on Linux. Let's go ahead and let's configure that out. So let's go back to the Azure portal and we'll configure our diagnostics. Let's see. So let's go back to our virtual machine here, back to the home page for our VM, and I'm going to go into the monitoring setting and go to diagnostics. Here under diagnostics, it asks me where do I want to store this data. Well, I want to store it in this storage account. If I didn't like that storage account, I could create another one specifically for storing my diagnostics information. I'm going to say enable guest level monitoring, and what this is going to do is this is actually going to install an agent or a client on my Linux machine. Some environments don't necessarily like the idea of agents being installed, but it does add the additional features to the monitoring. All right, that may take a couple of minutes. While that's going, let's look back at our metrics that we didn't see previously. Let's see, so metrics, it was percentage CPU that we were looking for. Maximum. And let's change this to the last 30 minutes. And there we could see when we booted the system, it went up, and now it's starting to level off. Additionally, we saw, what was the other one? It's flows, right? Input flows, average, there we go. And then you can start adding additional metrics in here as you might possibly desire. There's nothing there. That's interesting. This Q depth. Yeah. Okay, so we can add in additional metrics here, but we can definitely see, yes, we have both the CPU and the network there, and then we can add in additional as we want. Let's see, I saw that the install finished. Let's go ahead and check our boot diagnostics before we move forward. Do we get a screenshot? It's trying. There we go. If I zoom in, we'll see, yes, there's the VM name and it's at a login prompt, which is good. That's how virtual machine or how Linux machines should look if you were on the console. If it was stuck with a message that said something like kernel panic or was stuck at a boot selection screen, then that would tell me something is wrong with the operating system, and I could then go in and do something to resolve those issues. All right, so the settings, I'm sorry, the agent was just installed. Let's go ahead and configure the extension. Let's see. That just took me back to the virtual machine. Let's see, that was under monitoring, diagnostic settings. All right, so here we see the overview page as far as which metrics are already being collected. We can see processor, memory, network, file system, and disk, as well as several syslog messages. If you've gone much into syslog messages, you'll know what all of these mean, as far as basically this is a authentication log, the scheduler log, the service log, FTP log, and so on. And it says that it's gathering all of that information automatically. Let's go ahead and look into the metrics tab. And here we can see, yes, we're monitoring all of these basic metrics, currently at 15-second sample rate. Maybe we don't need 15 seconds. We can actually adjust this, say to 60. Apparently it doesn't like me typing 60. There we go. So we can easily change the granularity of how quickly we're monitoring all this information. It's not necessarily bad to monitor it quite so frequently. Oh, gotta click save. It's not necessarily bad to monitor it quite so frequently, but do we necessarily gain anything out of it? And it then does charge us a little bit for that storage location. All right, that will take a couple of minutes. While that's running, we could also see that there was an option to change the syslog. We saw that it was gathering quite a few logs already. We could add or delete those as necessary, as well as configuring the agent itself that's on the machine. So once that's done, what we're going to do is we're going to come over here to metrics, and we're going to create a custom KPI dashboard. There we go, successfully. Very briefly, syslogs. Yep. So what's being logged on the left-hand side, plus the level of logging we want to gather. Then the agent, where it's storing. And very briefly, back under metrics, we can choose custom, and then we can add in our own commands to start monitoring and its sample rate. All right, so let's go ahead and create a dashboard. So back here under monitoring again, we're going to go ahead and click on metrics, and we've got our data here. Let's go ahead and choose. See, under the namespace, I'm going to choose guest classic. The metric, I'm going to choose network in guest OS. So this is network for the guest OS inbound as opposed to outbound. And then aggregation maximum. Okay, so once that's done, let's go ahead and click pin to dashboard right here. And this is going to pin it to my dashboard in Azure. Sure, private. Sure, we'll choose my default dashboard. And we'll go ahead and no. Let's create new. There we go. Dashboard name. Let's call this KPI dashboard. We'll create a new dashboard for it, specifically to list all of my KPIs. So that created the dashboard, it pinned it. At this point, let's go ahead and create another one. New chart. In this case, the metric is going to be, it's going to again be the guest. And the metric I'm looking for is memory percentage available. Mem percent available and max. And then pin. Same dashboard for the KPIs. And then one more. And this time for the CPU usage. So guest. CPU percentage and max. And then pin that to the dashboard. Sure. All right, now that I've got all of this, let's go ahead and find our dashboard. Let's see, so from here I can go ahead and choose, so I click the hamburger menu up here. I'm gonna choose dashboard. It should ask me which dashboard I want. Right there, I'm gonna choose my KPI dashboard, and I will see I have my various monitors right here. We just installed the agent, so there isn't necessarily any content yet. But let's see, I think I can move these around. There we go. And save. And as the agent starts reporting data, the information will start appearing in these graphs. Awesome. Great. That's perfect. That's everything that we just wanted. And then that information will start showing up shortly. Let's talk about more diagnostic data. So again, we're talking about a scenario about our band being on tour next month. And we've seen some issues. See, specifically, we're concerned about a DDoS attack or some sort of other DOS attack against our environment that would cause our CPU to spike and would require additional services. So what we want to do is we want to set up some sort of monitoring in our environment so that we could be alerted when we see a DDoS attack or some other DOS, denial of service attack against our servers, as well as maybe just an abundance of people hitting our server that might require an additional virtual machine. So what we can do is, well, we can actually start monitoring and protecting ourselves against DDoS attacks. Specifically under monitoring and metrics, there is the capability to look for under DDoS attack. Oh, that's kind of an interesting metric. But we want to do more than just simply look at the metric. We want to actually do something about it. Same thing with increased CPU load. Here in this picture, we can see, yeah, there's a nice little trend. It's 0.6% CPU, but then we see a small spike here. Is that spike enough to get a virtual machine, new virtual machine? Well, if we start seeing that the trend is growing up over time, then maybe we need to start adding additional virtual machines but at which point do we consider that to be important, and then how do we get alerted to it? Let's go ahead and let's do that. Let's see, I don't think we actually need that console. Yeah, let's go back to the Azure portal. Let's go ahead and let's look back at our all services. Let's go back to our virtual machine. That's not what I wanted. All resources. Virtual machine. There we go. And I'm going to go back to our metrics for our monitoring section. And this time, instead of clicking metrics, I'm nope, that's right. I'm going to click metrics, but under metrics, I'm going to click new alert right here, new alert rule. So instead of creating a nice graph, I'm going to create a rule that talks about it. All right, so in this case, under scope, let's make this a little bit bigger. Select resource. So which resource are we monitoring, or which resource do we want to alert on? In this case, I want to alert specifically on my virtual machine. So I'm going to actually type in monitored, no, right, concierge subscription, filter by resource type. See, I think I want, hold on, excuse me, too quick on the click there. Search for filter, let's see, monitored, no. Resource type, there we go, all. There we go, and monitored VM Linux. Okay, so that's the VM I want to monitor on. That's great, select done. And there I can see, yes, okay, so we're gonna monitor this VM, and then what condition are we gonna monitor for? So I'll select condition, and in this case, I'm gonna search for percentage CPU. So right here, I'm gonna go ahead and type in, let's see, percentage. And I can see right there is my percentage CPU. And I can see I've got a nice little graph there. It gives me a little preview that shows me, yeah, okay, we've spiked to about 15%. We're now down here, at least for the last 6 hours. And so what I want to do is scroll on down. Tells me first off, hey, you can have a dynamic threshold in here. That's kind of handy. But let's go ahead and create a static threshold. And basically we're going to say if this percentage CPU is greater than or equal, sure, on average greater than or equal 90%. So if the average CPU percentage is greater than or equal to 90% for how long? Let's say 5 minutes. Sure, if it's greater than or equal to 90% for 5 minutes, and you're evaluating this every single minute, okay, that works. And then the actions. What do we want this to do when we've found that event to happen? Well, let's create an action. We're going to create an action group. The action groups work across multiple different alerts, so they're oftentimes helpful. This is similar to using a security group in Windows. Action group name, let's call this email. Sure. Notifications. Notification type. Well, let's choose email. I think that one. Yeah. We'll go and call this high CPU. And then the email to send a message to, and this would be your email or whoever you are interested in sending it to. So let's do, I don't know, user@example.com. And then you could choose other types such as SMS carrier, push, phone call, or so on. And okay. We can attach additional actions in here, such as proactively increasing the amount of virtual machines in this cluster. But for right now, we'll leave that empty. And then review and create, and we can see the examples right there. So create. And now we're set to send email alerts when something happens. All right, lastly, what is this rule? Web server CPU high as email alert when CPU is over 90%. All right, so very briefly, if we look through here, we defined our scope. So which resource are we monitoring, or what do we want to look at with regards to alerting? We chose one virtual machine. We could create multiple virtual machines, and we could even create dynamic queries to choose all virtual machines, either current or in the future. We then said, okay, we're monitoring that virtual machine, but what are we monitoring for? Well, we're looking for when the CPU is greater than 90% for 5 minutes in a row. If the CPU for that virtual machine gets to 90% for 5 minutes in a row, what are we going to do? We're going to email somebody and let them know that something's wrong. And then we're going to create this as a rule that we can then save and run, called this. Create alert rule. And at this point, it is now monitoring the virtual machine and will alert us if something goes wrong. So we can actually confirm this. What we can do is we can connect into the virtual machine. Let's go back to reconnect. So we can actually trigger into the virtual machine. I could have done this through the portal. I'll do it through here anyways. Nope, actually I'll do it through the portal because I don't remember the IP address for it. So we go back to the virtual machine. Let's get rid of the metrics. Back to the virtual machine. There we go. Connect via SSH. And that's what I'm looking for right there. Copy. And now we come back here. So SSH and then paste. So log me in as Azure user at that IP address. Yes, I trust this. And the SSH key is already set up for the shell, so it should log in without any password issues. What I'm then going to do is I'm going to install a stress testing tool. So sudo apt install stress. That goes out to the internet, finds this tool called stress, downloads it, and installs it. And then I can go ahead and install it or run it. So run stress. Specifically, I want to stress the CPU 16-V-T10M. Let's see, I believe this means for 10 minutes. Do a verbose stress test for 16 CPUs. I'm not entirely sure what those options mean, but it doesn't necessarily matter. Basically, we are doing a stress test of the CPU. In theory, in about 5 minutes, I should be getting a new email if I typed in my actual email address that would tell me that my CPU was spiking. With that being said, however, I can actually come back here to my monitored VM and look at the various monitoring capabilities. And shortly we will actually see a CPU spike happening right here, which should hopefully go up to 100%. That will take a couple of minutes for it to happen, but it should, in theory, occur. Let's see, last 30 minutes. Yeah, it looks like 1 minute's the smallest it can go. So a spike should pop up here, and then if this is allowed to run for 5 or more minutes, then it will send an email alert to me saying that something has gone wrong. In fact, we can see an example of that right there. Yay. All right, don't want to close that out just yet because I think that's the last step. Yeah. Let's refresh this. Oh, still no spike. All right, well, I'll leave that up to you guys to go ahead and follow through and watch the CPU spiking up, but it will happen faster than later, or sooner rather than later.